Sorry about that, babe.
Golden Sun. I have fond memories of playing through about maybe a third of it or so back in high school after borrowing it from my friend Chris. I do remember thoroughly enjoying my time with it, only to be distracted by high school football training camp, which ultimately sidetracked me around 18 years or so into the future, where I finally got around to playing Golden Sun in its entirety right here live on YouTube. Since my initial enjoyable playthrough, I saw just how lauded Golden Sun was on the interwebs. Combining that with the fact that it was developed by Camelot Software Planning, aka Sonic Software Planning, I knew that I was in for a treat. But with the lofty praise that I've seen, would it live up to the hype? I'm going to approach this review in a little bit of a different style. A while back when I reviewed Final Fantasy II on the Famicom, I did a similar format as opposed to my usual technical breakdown routine. The reason being, well, this might be bad news for major fans of Golden Sun, but I found there to be lots of issues with the game that I personally did not enjoy. With that being said, there was plenty to enjoy, so I'll alternate back and forth on points that I liked and points that I didn't. Things I enjoyed. The graphics. Aside from some visually skewed, borderline blurry sprites, I'm looking at you, Final Boss, it's pretty easy to point out that Golden Sun is very visually pleasing. The battle screens, attack animations, enemies, and characters all look great, especially that of things like critical attacks, magical attacks, and the totally awesome Genie summons. Many of the towns and dungeons have a unique coat of paint, and areas like the lighthouses give off a very powerful eminence and weighty feel. Considering that this was on a handheld console, it's all the more impressive. I played this mostly on the Game Boy Advance player on the GameCube while on stream, and I will admit that at times it made things look a little overblown, but I guess that's just the conversion to the big screen. Overall though, it was solid. However, when I played it on the small screen on my DS, which I utilized while grinding off stream, it was as crisp could be. Things I didn't enjoy. The story, dialogue, and character progression. Yeah, I guess I'm just going in already. This is by far the weakest point of Golden Sun, which is very unfortunate considering that this is an RPG and it's filled to the brim with dialogue. I'm not going to get too into the story, but basically, Saturos and Minardi, aka bad guys, are besieging Mount Aleph to get the elemental stars, which are the keys to unlocking alchemy, and I guess that could be bad if it gets spread across the world. Anyways, because they are morons, they set off traps which then cause a rock slide, including a gigantic boulder that's threatening Isaac's, the silent main protagonist's, hometown. In the aftermath, some people, including Isaac's father, are presumed dead. Flash forward a few years, and the crew of Isaac, Garrett, and Jenna meet up with their teacher Creighton, who's researching Mount Aleph, and yada yada. Eventually, Isaac gives up 3 of the 4 elemental stars from within. This causes a catastrophe, and everyone is forced to leave. The bad guys that I mentioned earlier capture Creighton and Jenna, who, by the way, is a childhood friend of Isaac and Garrett, and then the duo are saved by a big rock eyeball named the Wise One. The Wise One then tells them that they must stop Saturos and Minardi from casting the stars into the elemental lighthouses, and more or less they must stop them to save the world of Weyard. I forgot to mention that the playable characters are known as Adepts, who use synergy, also known as magic, based off of certain elements. Adepts are very powerful and important to the world and outcome of all things. Now, already just through the stuff that I briefly touched on, I was starting to get incredibly bored by the dialogue. My goodness, does everybody talk and talk and talk throughout Golden Sun. You really do get your money's worth from the word count. Now, the amount of dialogue isn't my issue. The issue is that most of the dialogue being spoken is boring, repetitive, and at times just unnecessary. I don't know how many times I talked to townspeople, or even important characters, and the conversations didn't grip me in the slightest. That's not even taking into consideration the fact that oftentimes during conversations with your entire party involved, you'll have instances where every character chimes in about something more or less in agreement, so you'll have like 3 or 4 dialogue prompts of people saying like, yeah, Isaac, let's do that, or something like what you're seeing right now. Continuing on with the cruddy dialogue, you are given so many illusion of choice prompts throughout the game, mostly yes or no, the majority of which have no outcome on anything important in the game, and even at times the dialogue apparently doesn't change at all. I looked into it a little bit after I played. Illusion of choice is something that I can't stand, so like why even have it? It's like the old saying, putting lipstick on a pig, you're just trying to quote-unquote enhance the boring dialogue with more time consumption? And then wrapping around to the 4 main characters, Isaac, Garrett, Ivan, and Mia. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoy lots of old school RPGs with very minimal story, but goodness gracious. For a game that is jam-packed with dialogue, and one that came out in 2001, not 1991, you'd expect a little something extra. But Golden Sun offers up some of the most bland characters that I've ever seen in an RPG and next to no character development. I legitimately didn't care about any of the characters, and I didn't through the entire game. When I think of stuff like this, I naturally compare it to Shining Force 3, which came out years prior, also by Camelot. Granted, it was on a home console and not a handheld, but regardless of graphics and power, with the amount of dialogue prompts that are in Golden Sun, you'd think they'd be able to whip up something interesting, gripping, get a feel for the characters like I did in Shining Force 3, but nope. Probably the most emotional segment of the game was the very beginning, to which you know next to nothing about anybody or what's really happening at the time. I could go on and on about this, but I'd rather not drag on like an unnecessarily long cutscene in Golden Sun. Things I enjoyed. The soundtrack. This is one damn good sounding game. Composer Motoi Sakuraba absolutely nailed it. Whether it be the heart-pumping battle themes, the cozy feel of the town songs, the dramatics of the lighthouses, the ambience of the deserts, or my favorite of the bunch, the Elemental Stars, which is playing throughout this review, there's a little something for every pace, mood, and feeling. I was not let down by this aspect of Golden Sun in the slightest. In fact, it was one of the better soundtracks that I've heard in quite some time, so major props here. Things I didn't enjoy. The pacing. This was probably shown no better than by which of my streams got limited for ad exposure, aka those streams in which I raged and swore up a storm. I felt like I was constantly alternating from having a good time on one stream to having a cruddy time the next. Probably the best example of this pacing issue is towards the middle-ish of the game where we have the boat segment. Yeah, I think you should know what I'm talking about when I say that. My goodness, that segment was so boring, completely killed the pacing, featuring more overtly long and superfluous dialogue, and it just sent me into a tizzy. But then, basically right after that, you wind up in Tolby, where you get to play some awesome games and everything is just wonderful and fun. I just felt like Golden Sun constantly ebbed and flowed in the right and wrong directions, consistently killing my desire to play one moment and then lighting my flame like a lighthouse shortly thereafter. Things I enjoyed. The combat system. I must say that I longed for combat, even of the random encounter variety, to save me from the lengthy discussions about nothing. And thankfully Golden Sun has a pretty sweet combat system. You have the natural ability to attack, run, defend, use synergy, which again is magic, all of which feature pretty cool animations, but the crown jewel of the combat system are the Djinnis. Djinn, or Djinnis, are little creatures that you find scattered across the world assigned to different elements. Each one has a unique ability that can be cast in battle, or the Djinn could just be set, giving stat buffs to the characters that it's set to. Now the extra step that's even cooler is that if the Djinnis are used in battle or on standby, if you will, they could be combined to use as a summon. The summons are incredibly powerful and feature some truly badass animations and cutscenes of their own. Another unique thing, which admittedly I didn't explore much, was mixing and matching of the Djinnis to unlock special abilities and spread different elemental synergy across the different characters. The possibilities there are almost endless. But I was a straight noob during this playthrough and I kept things strictly base elemental assigned, unless I specifically needed someone to learn something different to aid me in a dungeon puzzle. I really can't complain about the combat system at all, but I will say as the game went on I found that it could be heavily abused to make the game a lot easier. Whether it be loading up massive summons pre-battle by putting the Djinnis on standby, like say before a boss or something, or late in the game when I was somewhat underleveled I started spamming the Granite plus Flash Djinnis, which gave me massive defense and protection buffs to the party, alternating their casting throughout, thereby trivializing some of the major battles including the secret boss at Crossbone Isle. But honestly, it's sorta charming. Golden Sun battle system is engaging and pretty fun, so no hate here. Things I sort of enjoyed? The puzzles. Puzzles are the main staple of the gameplay of Golden Sun, aside of course from the combat and Djinni system. These puzzles are littered throughout the game, but mostly appear in the dungeons. I found the puzzles of Golden Sun to be decent, but repetitive. That being said, in general I did enjoy the puzzles revolving around the logs, having to use the reveal synergy to find hidden platforms and areas, as well as the connecting line type puzzle thing in the final dungeon. Those were all pretty cool. However, what I didn't like regarding these same puzzles are some of the things that come with it. I had a heck of a time judging the north to south perspective throughout the course of this game. Now I realize that totally might just be a me thing, but it did screw with me and it did bother me, so I'm listing it. There were times where I was unsure if something would work if I moved a pillar to a spot during a puzzle because I had a tough time gauging the perspective of the blocks, so to speak. Coupled with that, many of the puzzles in the game require a pixel perfect placement of Isaac before using the synergy. Like seriously, I don't know how many times I was right next to something, and I couldn't use my synergy because no word of a lie, Isaac's big toe was 1 pixel too far back or too far in. That repeated many times throughout the entire game, and made a lot of the puzzling a chore. even if they did include the 2 synergy 2-button shortcut system to cut down time on grabbing the synergies from menuing. In summation, Golden Sun was about as mixed as an enjoyment that I've ever had. I liked the graphics. I hated the story and characters. I loved the soundtrack. I hated the endless, meaningless dialogue. I liked the combat system. I hated the game's pacing. I liked half of the puzzle mechanics. I hated the other half. This was truly a difficult review for me to put together, because I don't want to crap on your favorite game, but at the same time I do have to be true to myself. I found Golden Sun to be good, but certainly nowhere near great, and honestly, to me, it was an overrated RPG experience. However, the presentation of Golden Sun, coupled with the generally fun combat and puzzling, does make for a good game, despite having many rough edges. As such, I give Golden Sun a 7 out of 10. I still think that this is a game worthy of a playthrough, but this is nowhere near the upper echelon of RPGs for me at least, not in the slightest. That being said, I do still plan on playing the rest of the series at some point. I heard really good things about The Lost Age, and I will go into it with an open mind. But I can't see myself replaying the first Golden Sun anytime soon. If you've enjoyed this review, which probably a lot of you didn't, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to check out my first ever full playthrough of Golden Sun, check out the pinned comment description below or the end screen. Take care.